Oh, this is you can only. Okay, okay, okay. Alright. Reset. Everybody fucking mentally reset. Lock it. Alright, so, welcome to Unreal Engine 101. Today we are going to be covering a few basic core concepts of what makes Unreal Engine, what makes it so goddamn unreal. So today we're just going to start with our own project. I'm going to be opening up a third-person project. Did you hear my cat yelling at me? We're going to put a third-person project. We're going to keep this blueprint. And the difference between... So, okay. We'll get into it in more depth when we actually open it up. But surface level, blueprinting is, imagine... like if you had a bell curve, and on one side you had like scratch coding. In the middle, you'd have like some dude sending his keyboard through his monitor, trying to like compile some C++ script. And then on the opposite end of this bell curve, you have blueprinting or visual scripting. And visual scripting is essentially block coding, but like much more in depth. They take like C++ commands and condense it into stuff that you can like plug and play together. That might not make any sense right now, but it will once we get into it. So I'm gonna call this my project 101. Good ring to it. This blueprint, just have starter content on. It just gives you some basic like meshes and stuff like that to work with. Oh, I'll actually explain what a mesh is. That's actually a pretty common question I get. A mesh is just a 3D object. You'll hear it a bunch. I think it's probably like the Blender term for it, but it's been ingrained in my head, so I'll never call it like 3D object. I'm just gonna call it mesh. Okay, now that this is open, this right here, what you're looking at, is the level editor. This entire thing put together, this entire screen, level editor, because you're editing the level. More specifically, though, you have this window where you're actually seeing everything. This is your viewport, right? So what like is moving around? Right-click on the mouse rotates the camera. Left-click and holding down lets you slide the camera, and up and down, or I mean just panning the camera, is middle mouse. Hold that down. So you kind of use all three, and scrolling up and down zooms in and out. So using all three, that's how you manipulate the camera around. Every mesh in a viewport has 3 axi that it works off of. You have the X, which is red. You have the Y, which is green. And you have the blue, which is Z. Z is the objects up and down, and right and left, and side to side, or whatever those are. Those are X's and Y's. It's easy to visualize. It's just like a grid, right? So you have the X and the Y, and since 3D is 3 dimensions, since you have your X dimension, your Y dimension, and then you add a Z dimension. Okay, so off of these properties, you have moving. I think it's called like translating or transforming. Is just moving it off of these axi. You can rotate them, right? And you can scale them on these axi. You make them bigger. Also, Control Z undoes. That's pretty much universal, but it's a very handy thing to know. And also, there are 2 spaces that you can move, rotate, translate by, and it's local and world. World, it will always adhere to like the no matter what I click, you'll see that the orientation of those axi are always facing. X is always going that way, Y is always going this way, and Z is always going up and down. Local, which is this little icon up here, local will translate it to the actual cube. So if I rotate it, let's say 45 degrees or 40 degrees on the x-axis, and rotate the Z as well, 50 degrees. And if I go back to here, you see how this is still moving it along the global x-axis. If I switch it to local, you're going to see this flip around. See, now it is using the perspective of the cube. It's the local. The cube is the local. The mesh is the local. So that's just basic manipulations. Now, before we even press play, there's one other thing that I want to cover, and it is the content browser. Now, it used to just be docked into your window on the bottom here, but now, because of, I guess, streamlining, I don't even know, but Unreal Engine 5, you press Control Space, and it brings up your content browser. This is just like a file explorer on your computer. This is literally just folders. You can dock in your layout, and it'll just kind of make it its own window, and you can like more specifically drag it around and put it on any side of your screen that you want. This is actually how it used to be just by default in Unreal Engine 4, but we don't believe in that anymore. So yes, we covered local space, we covered world space. Now I want to cover what we're actually looking at here. So we're looking at the viewport. This is the 3D viewport. This is everything this is your scene. This is everything that's in it. You're actually looking at it. Now off on the right, you'll notice we have three things. We have the outliner, the details, and the world details, or world settings. World settings, just forget about it for right now. Forget about it. Outliner is it's simply just a list of everything that is in your scene. If I click on the blue cube, I can see that it's selected here. I can also do it vice versa, so I can select another cube from this. So this is your scene, this is your viewport, this is a list of everything that is in your scene, everything that's in your viewport. Then details will give you specific details about whatever specific thing that you've selected. So if I have this cube selected and I open up the details, I'm going to see the details about the cube. Now this is an important thing to note because this isn't just in your world here, this is in the blueprints as well, and we'll get to that in just now, actually. Alright, so now that we have everything else out of the way, we can actually get into the programming of Unreal Engine. So if you press Control Space and bring up your content browser, assuming that you imported the default third person, we're just going to go to third person, we're going to go to blueprints, and we're going to open up third person character. Now, welcome to Unreal Engine scripting. Right off the bat, we're going to go up to the viewport. Right here, it's this little tab, and this is the same exact layout of the outside world here. So we have our 3D viewport, our viewport right here, which is just everything that is actually attached to our character. This is our character. And over here on the left, this is the same as the outliner here, where it's just a list of everything that is in your scene. This is just a list of everything that is in your character scene. And now on the right, we have the details, which is the same as the details panel in the world view. It's just for each individual object on your character. So if I select the character mesh, I can get all the details for it. I can actually change this around. So if I do this, now he's a dude. Very cool. So that is the basics for just like viewports in general. Now if we play right now, we're going to see the default character moving around with no changes to it. Now we're going to make some changes just so we can see it visually. So if we go into the viewport and we select the camera, we can monitor the settings here. So we're going to be looking at the transform, the location specifically. And we're just going to move this a little up to the right. We're going to get kind of more over the shoulder view. Fantastic. See how those changes have directly translated to our actual actor in the world? Excellent. So, we'll call that good for now. But notice that the settings here are now 80 and 80 on the Y and the X. I mean the Y and the Z. But I can also change it from here. Details. Now, onto the scripting. This is the event graph. All of these graphs here are called blueprints, as you can see in the lower right hand corner right there. So, these are called nodes. These are essentially condensed C++ script commands. There's a billion of these, but we are just going to cover two main ones for now. One is just any of these that have, so these are called execution pins. And if you notice, all of these guys have two of them. They have an input and they have an output, right? They have two of them. That's one kind. The other kind is the events. Now the events are the red ones, and if you notice, they only have an output. The best way to picture an event is to picture a start. These just start code. Whatever line of code that you have, you'll start it from an event. So, we're going to get some empty space here. Now, if you look in the lower left-hand side, this little window, it's called My Blueprint. This is essentially just an outliner, much like this, but for your code. Now, on the bottom here, you're going to see variables. Now, Unreal Engine handles variables in a very, it's a simple, but it's a very specific way. They handle variables through, it's kind of their own way. But a variable, at its core, a variable is just a value. In fact, it's not even that. It's a placeholder for a value. It is something that you assign value to. Now, you can get and you can set variables in Unreal Engine. You can get a variable, which is just getting the current value of that variable. So if my variable has a value of 4 and I get the variable, I am getting 4. I am getting the value 4. Or I can set a variable. So let's say I want to set a variable's value to fucking baloney. Right? I'll drag it out, I'll press set, and I'll set it to fucking baloney. Now, Unreal Engine does this in essentially color-coded way to appeal to our, 8 brains. So I'm just going to press this little plus icon and create a variable. I'm going to call this variable. And I can change what kind of variable this is by clicking here. Yours will be Boolean, mine is float because I've just been fucking around in this off screen. But if you click on this and you bring down this whole track down list, these are the basic types of variables that Unreal Engine has. Like I said, you are probably looking at a Boolean right now. And I'm just going to bang these out real quick. I'm going to just say what the important ones are. The Boolean is a true or false. The value of a Boolean can either be true or it can be false. It's either blank or it's a check mark, which is true. An integer is a whole number. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Float is a decimal pointed number, meaning that it doesn't have 1, it'll be 1.0, 1.5, 9.2, 6.9. Nice. Then you have strings, which I've, honest to God, never used any of these as an actual just variable. But a string is just a string. It's just text. Same with these guys too. Now the 3 important ones to note here, because you will be using these a lot. You vector, rotator, and transform. Now the vector is a point on the 3D graph that's essentially a 3D coordinates, as it's an x, comma y, comma z, and it gives you your 3D location. A vector is, if I select the mesh right here, and I go to the details panel, this x, y, and z right here, this together is a vector. Location is your vector. That's a good way to remember it. A vector is your location. Now, rotator is the same coordinate system as the vector, but it is for your rotation. That is this guy right here. And then you have your scale, which scale isn't its own variable, but that's just because it's just a number, I guess. But transform is a combination of vector, rotator, and scale. If you put them all together, you get a transform. And we'll go into that a little in depth later, but for right now, we're just going to do some basic variable manipulation. So I'm only going to be using two variables as variables here. These are the most important variables that you're going to use when using Unreal Engine. These two are just like your top two. They're most commonly used. So right off the bat, you have a float variable. We'll call it float var. And we'll make this one the bool var. Make this guy boolean. Very nice. Now, I think the first thing that we are going to cover, we're going to start with the floats, and we're going to start with the events. Now, I've talked about it a little bit briefly, but now we're going to actually put it into practice. So right now, when you play, there is nothing special about your character. There just is the default the way that it came, right? This is it out of the box. Now, I noticed that my character is pretty slow, and let's say that I want to make them run faster. We need to implement a shift mechanic. Now, we need a input for that. In fact, our input is going to be the shift key. So if you right click, you're going to get this little window up here, and this is how you get commands. You type it out. So I want shift. And these are all the different events that could happen. I want left shift keyboard event. Now, if you look here, we're going to use this is another very, 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 very important tool. This is called a string, and all you do is you print it. You print string, and you use this for debugging. So now, when we press left shift, it's going to print out a string that says right now hello, but I want this to say sprint, and then I'm going to Control C, copy, Control V, paste. I said Control C, copy, Control V, paste. And this one's going to be called walk. So when I press left shift, you're going to see in the upper left hand corner of my screen, when I press shift, you're going to see a string that says sprint, and when I let go of it, you're going to see a string that says walk. Now, we have to take this value. This float variable is our speed. In fact, I should do it. I'm actually gonna rename this speed. This float variable is now our speed variable. By default, your character movement here, this is just a property. It is set to, I think, 600 walk speed. So in your details panel, if we actually type out walk speed, our max walk speed is 500 centimeters per second. So we want, whenever you are sprinting, we're going to set this to 700. So we're going 700, 200 over our default. And when we let go of it, you just drag it and drop it right here. When you let go of it, we're going to set it back down to 500. So right now, if you press shift and let go of shift, all we're doing is changing the value of a variable. We aren't actually doing anything to it. So we need to be assigning this to this value, max walk speed. Now we can reference this variable through our character movement. So if we drag our character movement out here, we can essentially grab a detail from it. So we're going to drag out of here, and we're going to look for max walk speed. And see, you can get or set these. We are going to be setting this, right? Because we don't just want to get a reference to what it is, because we want to set this value equal to our speed value, our speed variable. So we're going to set max walk speed. Right now it's 0, but we're going to run it. We're going to set the value here with our speed variable. See? But now we need to be executing this, and in fact we need to be constantly checking for this. So we're going to be using this event. This is called the event tick. Now you'll see a lot of slander about the good name of the event tick. There are reasons for using it, there are reasons against using it. The event tick, what it does is it is running constantly. It runs off of a tick. Think of a clock. Every second, it is going to be checking for, and well, not every second. I think it's like 0.2 decimal point. I don't know. It's constant. It is a constant thing. It's like every 0.01 seconds, it's running this command, running this event. Meaning that anything that we run off of this will be constantly running. So if I actually have this connected to a print string, and I tell it to say tick, when I run, you're just going to see a line of strings saying tick. See? That's how fast the tick goes. We want to constantly setting the value of our character movement's walk speed with speed variable. So we connect that, like so. So now, we are constantly setting our character movement max walk speed to the value of our speed variable. And that speed variable we can alter by pressing the left shift button. Meaning that if we play, and we're just moving around, well, that doesn't seem right. Ah, yes. That is because our default value for speed variable is at 0. So if we don't press anything in the beginning, if we don't set this variable, it's going to be running at 0. But I want to update this to 500, which is default speed. So now it's moving normally. And if we press shift, we start going faster. I'll actually make this a little bit faster. I'll make this 1000. So we're running normally. If we press shift, we're sprinting. We let go, we stop sprinting. Sprint, not sprint. Sprint, not sprint. Sprint, not sprint. Excellent. And we can actually do, and because of the way that we built this, where the speed variable is actually completely unattached from pressing the shift, right? Like we're not like direct lining it. We are setting a variable and then constantly referencing that variable. We can do whatever we want with this speed variable. Let's say we want to add a walk, right? So I'll do it off of caps lock. So on keyboard event caps lock, we're going to be setting the speed variable to 250. And on release, we're going to be setting it back to default, which is 500. Now, if we run around, we press caps lock, we're walking. Let go of it, we're walking. Sprinting, walking. So now we can just freely reference this variable. Now, a very, very important note: keep your code organized. You do this by not just keeping the same spot, but you can select all of it. You can press the letter C, and you can create a comment. So I'm going to call this floats and events. You can adjust stuff here, so I'll maybe make this like 50. So we have our floats and events. So we are going. Let's make a shooting mechanic. Real quick, we're gonna make a. So we're gonna make a mechanic that will only allow you to shoot if you are aiming. So already off of that, we have an if and a then. If aiming, then bang. Right? If aiming, then shoot. That sounds like a job for a Boolean. So let's get an aiming functionality. We're going to do it off of right mouse button. So we'll just do right mouse button. And if we press this, we're going to actually get our bool variable. We're going to rename our bool variable to aim var. And if we are pressing the right mouse button, set aiming, it's true. And if we're letting go of it, we'll set it to false. And actually, instead of using our typical print string to see if we are actually executing this, let's do a cool thing with the camera. So we're going to grab the camera is attached to the camera boom. Now the camera boom is just like the arm's length that the camera is away from like the character. So if I change it, makes it shorter. See? So we can actually just get it off of this value, the target arm length. So if I grab the camera boom and I type out set target arm length, I think by default it is 400. So when we are aiming, we want to set this to like 250. And we're just going to Control C, Control V to get another instance of this. Oh, I did it twice. And this is back to the default, which is 400. And we'll connect this reference to the object variable. So now, if we aim, we zoom in. Very nice. But so far we aren't actually using the variable for anything. So now we want to have the shooting mechanic. So I'll type out left mouse button. And the left mouse button, when we press it, we're just going to print a string that says bang. So we click it, it says bang. Incredible. Now, I only want this to shoot if I am aiming. So I'm going to use my variable, aim variable, which we are setting true if we are aiming, and false if we are not aiming. We are going to check for this variable. We're going to be checking using a thing called the branch. Now, the branch is a very important, it's such a useful tool. It is just going to be doing a true-false based off of your true-false variable. So we're going to set it to aim variable. So if we press the left mouse button, the shooting button, we're going to immediately do a check to see the value of this aim variable. If it is true, we're going to print out a string that says bang, and if not, nothing happens. So if we press play and I click shoot, nothing's happening. However, if I'm aiming and I click shoot, now we can shoot. Not bad, huh? Now I'm gonna wreck your fucking brain. First, I'm just gonna put this over to the side and comment this quickly. Boolean. Now, here's the thing. Your branches don't need to be determined by, like, just because the branch is determined by a true false doesn't mean that that true false has to come from a Boolean. Now, I want this character to jump higher when I'm sprinting. So right off the bat, if we're thinking about this the right way, we're going to say on the time of pressing jump, if sprinting, then jump higher. Else, or false, jump normal height. So what we're going to do is I think they might be referencing jump. Okay, so they're already referencing jump in their basic layout here, the pre-made blueprint. We're just going to get rid of this. Get rid of the jump. The enhanced input action IA jump input action there. Select it, press delete, get rid of it. I never want to see it again. We're going to be running our own jump off of the space bar. So I want to right click and I want to type out space bar. And now off of the space bar, because of a nice command that's already given by default on the third person blueprint, is jump. So now, if I press spacebar, I jump. So, we want to check. Well, first we actually want to find out how to set our value for how high we jump. That is a trait on the character movement's behalf, much how the walk speed is. I don't know if you guys saw it before, if you're really paying attention. Jumping, falling, jump Z velocity is what we're after here. So we want to set jump Z velocity. Set jump Z velocity. By default, the value of jump Z velocity is 700 centimeters per second. So 700 is our basic value. So we're going to go do this a little bit backwards here. We're going to start from our output, because our output is going to either be set jump Z velocity to 700, which is the default, or we're going to set it to 1,000. And either way, we're going to jump at the end of this. So we have two possible outputs here. Either we're jumping at 1,000 velocity, or jumping at 700 velocity. Now, what do you know that can give out two possible outputs with one input? If you said the branch, good job for paying attention. I'm going to come out of here, I'm going to type for the branch. Now on true, if we are, so this value we're going to be looking for if we are sprinting. If we are, we're going to be jumping high, and if not, we're going to be jumping low. Now, if you notice, we don't have a variable called, we don't have a speed variable that is a Boolean. We have a speed variable that is a float. But we're going to get this variable anyways, because this is what we need to use to determine if we're sprinting or not. Now, what qualifies as sprinting here? Let's just think about it. when we hold left shift, we go from the default speed of being 500 to over 500, 1,000. So we need to grab if it is over 500 centimeters per second, or whatever the hell metric system they're using. We need to determine if our variable is over the normal speed, which is 500. So we're going to get a check. And we're going to see if our variable is greater than 500. And you see how the output here is a Boolean? Because we're doing a check to see if this is, because this is either greater than or it's not greater than. It is either true or it is false. This statement is either true or false. So we're going to plug this into here, and now this is adhering to this logic. So if we're going to press spacebar, we're going to shoot off to a branch, and this branch is asking the question if it's true or false. Now the statement here is saying that the speed variable is greater than 500. Right? So the equation that we've put together in total here is if the speed variable is greater than 500, we are going to jump with 1,000 velocity. If it is less, or if it is just not greater than 500, we are going to jump with the normal velocity. Got it? So now, if I jump, I'm jumping normally. You see, I can't get above this thing. But if I'm sprinting, I can clear this whole thing. And technically, this isn't, like, I could be doing this off of the current speed, because right now I can just jump, and then if I'm pressing the sprint button. But you can just do that with more checks to see if, like, your actual speed is going over 500, or just your set speed is above 500. Whatever. Not the point. The point is that we framed a piece of programming using a Boolean true-false expression, but using the value of a float to get there. It's problem solving. There's a correct way to solve a problem, but that doesn't mean there's only one way to solve it, right? There's plenty of ways to get the value of 4. You don't have to just do 2 plus 2. Okay, I'm gonna comment this. I'm gonna call it floats and bools. Oh, too much sauce. $50. Good lord. Alright. And this is all we're going to be doing for the floats. So I'm just going to comment all of this and just call it floats. And here's a cool little thing you do with the comments. You can change their color. Make this a nice little green. Make this red. For Booleans, of course. Now we are going to be covering 2 more things. The first and foremost, we will be implementing the transform location vector, rotation vector, all in one go, off of this mechanic. We are going to be using something. This is the shooting mechanic. See, this is where it says bang, but instead of just saying bang, we're going to actually shoot. We are going to be using this is one of my personal favorite commands in all of Unreal Engine, the line trace. Now the line trace is an excellent, it's a good example of how you can do so much more out of something that's simple. You just got to think about it the right way. A line trace, we're going to do a line trace by channel. This is just shooting a line trace from point A to point B. This is just shooting a line, just a line connecting point A to point B. But there are so many values to get out of this. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First things first, where are we coming from and where are we going to? We are going to be starting from the camera. That is where most games shoot out of. Whether or not you know it or feel it, that's where they do. You play Call of Duty, you're not shooting from the gun, you're shooting from your camera. So that's what we're going to be doing. And you could start with whatever you want and just end with the camera, but we're just going to, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to start with the camera. So we're going to grab a reference to this camera, and we are going to get this camera's transform. Now remember, the transform is your location, your rotation, and your scale all packaged together make your transform. So we're going to get transform. We're going to get world transform. This kind of ties into earlier where I was breaking down the basic differences between world and local. World is the world's reference to you. Local is your own reference to yourself. So you could be facing 45 degrees to yourself, but facing 180 for the world. It just depends on your perspective. Now, this is where we're really going to visualize what the world transform is. Because if you notice, this is orange, this is yellow. The orange is the transform. The yellow is looking just for a location vector. This contains the location vector, so we're going to break it. You're going to right click on the return value out of transform. I'm going to hit split struct pin. And now this is splitting into the structures that make it a transform. We have our location, our rotation, and our scale. We're just looking for a location. So we're going to start with our camera's location. Fair enough. Fair enough. And this is where we're going to get a little tricky. We're going to have to do a little bit of math. We want to go from our camera's location to our camera's location in like 1,000 feet. We want to go from our camera's location to in front of our camera. So we're going to need a couple things out of this. First, we need to get the forward orientation of this camera. Now this used forever and ever ago. This was like an Unreal Engine 4.2, right? Way back when you used to actually have to manually do the math to get your forward orientation. Now they have a lovely little vector called the forward vector. Now the forward vector takes your rotation and determines your orientation from it. So it's an input of a rotation. Then you can get the forward vector. Get forward vector. And you're going to output the direction you're facing. But we're not done here, because right now we still are in the same exact location as before. We just have our so this is an interesting thing. This is always going to be your local. This is completely. This isn't even local. This is reduced to your location being your rotation. So this is now an empty location based off of your forward rotation. So we need to do two things to this. First, we need to extend this forward, because now that we have our forward, we can push it out. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to multiply this by a float. Now, when you're doing basic operations, it's always going to be the same as, this is stupid. This used to just be an empty value that you could just set in Unreal Engine 4. In Unreal Engine 5, they try to like automatically map your operations to whatever variable you're outputting. But if you just right-click this, you can change what it is. We're going to be doing the float. We're going to be shooting it out by friggin' 10,000 points. This is how far a bullet's going to go. So right now, we have two big ingredients that we are going to use here. We have our forward vector, which is generated by our object's rotation and the forward orientation of that rotation, and then that extended out friggin' 10,000 points ahead, right? So we have our forward face 1,000 meters away. Unfortunately, this forward face is just existing in like a vacuum. I think this is automatically put at like the location of 0, 0, 0, 0 with the location of the forward rotation. So we need to add this back to our original location. And that's literally what we're going to do. We're going to take our original location. Actually, we can use the same line that we're doing here. If you double click this line, you can get a little side pin. So we're just going to be hijacking the same exact line. And I'm going to use an add. And we're going to be adding our forward vector 1,000 feet away into our original location. And that's where we're going to end. Now I'm going to select this debug type, this draw debug type, to persistent, so we can actually see our line trace. But if this is successful, you will see a line go out and shoot wherever we're aiming. So if I click shoot, nothing happens because I'm not aiming. But if I'm aiming and I click shoot, we see a line. We shoot a line right to the dead center of our camera. See? And now the line trace has a lot of things. So off of the bat, the simple stuff, it goes from point A to point B. The point A up here is our camera. The point B is whatever it hits. And if you notice, after it hits, it keeps continuing on. But it's green. Green just means that it hit something. So you have an impact point, which is this red little square. You have the length of it, which would just be the red plus the green, and that's just the total length of it. The length of it, keep in mind here, is this number, whatever this ungodly number is. And then, but based off of that, we can make many calculations. So we're gonna do just that. Actually, before we're gonna digest this for a second. We're gonna walk through this one more time. I know we've done it a bunch of times, but it's important to know what you're doing. I'm going to comment this, and I call it line trace and transform. And I'm feeling a nice, like, tan for this one. Yeah, something like that. That's good. So we have our line trace in transform, which is we are taking our camera's transform and we're grabbing the location and using that to start our line trace. So point A is our camera's strict location. And point B is where things get complicated. We take our rotation, our camera's rotation, and from there we generate our forward vector, our forward orientation, and we go forward from our location like 100,000 points, and in that location, which is now 100,000 points in front of our forward vector, we add that to our original location. So we essentially calculate the distance and then add the distance. We calculate our forward distance and then add our forward distance to our original location. And then that is our point B. So this last thing that we're going to be covering is, and I'm not going to go in depth at this with this like at all, because it gets very, very, very complicated very quickly. But we are going to be doing this one thing is going to be broken up into two things. But the more important thing is the number one thing, which is casting. Now you've probably heard of this. You've probably heard horror stories, and it is a little scary, but we'll get through it, I promise. Now, casting is when you essentially send a sign, a signal, whatever, from one blueprint to another. So when you go from one actor to another, that's called casting. So for that, we're going to need another actor. And our goal here is I want to just shoot a bad guy, right? That's it. So before that, we need to make a bad guy. So we're going to go into our blueprints here, and we're going to make a new guy. We're going to make a blueprint class, and we're going to make this guy just a pawn. So these are the basic actors, or the basic blueprints. These are just like the default. An actor is just an empty object, and you put whatever it is. A pawn is an actor, but with like a, it's like built so it can receive input. A character is a pawn that's been like given actual like abilities of like walking around and stuff, but these are just kind of built on top of each other. But these are the main three that you're gonna focus on when you're just making like NPCs or things that you pick up, but like things that aren't just regular meshes, but actual things with code with them. An actor is just an object. A pawn is just an empty character. And then a character is a character that can really actually be controlled. So they're just kind of built on top of each other. We're going to be just doing a pawn. We're not even going to be doing a full character. We're just doing a pawn. And this pawn we'll call enemy. Oh, we'll call it E. We're going to call this enemy pawn. Now if we open this up, completely empty. No bueno. We are going to be adding a mesh. So if you press Control Space to bring this up again, and you actually go back to your blueprint, this is some handy dandy getting around your Explorer here. If you click on something that you like, and you want to find where it is in your folders, see, I want the skeletal mesh asset. I want the actual mesh. See this little icon? I can find it in my content browser. So if I click this, it's going to take me straight there. So I want this guy. So two options. Either I could drag this guy into here, or the more impressive option, if I just click him, and then I click the add button, see how the skeletal mesh adding components here is already kind of filled, it's already filled in within parentheses here. It just references whatever you have last clicked. So if I click that, now we got this guy in here. And then go back to third person blueprints, and where we made this enemy pawn, we just drag him out. There he is. And there's our bad guy. Now we have something to reference to. But before that, we're going to be covering our... You know how I said there's two things that we're going to be covering in this one thing? We're going to be doing the two thing right now. So we need to have... when this guy gets shot, we need an event that tells him to essentially die. So we're going to do that. But there's not like an input for dying, right? There's not like a button. There's not like a dead button on the keyboard. Unless you wanted there to be, of course. My point is, we need to make our own event, our own start. These are called custom events. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to type out custom event. This custom event I'm going to call, I don't think that's, what should I call it? We'll call it KIA, and we'll just let you assume what that is. We'll call it the Kia. And on Kia, we actually, I think we're just gonna ragdoll this guy. First thing about a Kia though, you only want to do it once. You don't want to, like, if something happens that is supposed to be the final thing to happen, you don't want it to be happen again every time you call it. So we're gonna quickly use something called a do once. And this is exactly what it seems like. It means, like, no matter how many times we execute this custom event, it's only going to actually execute its code once. So after the do once, we're going to grab a reference to this guy, and we're going to set simulate physics. And we're going to set the simulate to true. And this is just going to ragdoll the guy. Sorry for the spoilers. So on our, and we'll even call this custom event. On our custom event Kia, our character is just going to one time go ragdoll, and that means he's dead. But now we have something to reference to. We have something to cast to, and we have something to reference to. We're going to cast to the enemy pawn, and we're going to reference its death event. Now all that's out of the way, let's go back to actual casting. So off the execution pin here, I'm going to type out cast to enemy pawn. Now this is a scary looking motherfucker. Why it's scary is because of this object pin, this object wildcard. Now this is, wildcard could not be a better name for it. It's essentially whatever permission you have to cast to this actor. So this is where things get real scary, because you can't just make up permission out of nowhere. You need to actually get it from something. In our case, we want to cast to the enemy pawn in the case that we hit it, right, with our line trace, that our line trace makes impact with the enemy. So, out of the out hit, we can actually get that value. We're going to break hit results. That doesn't seem like a lot until you hit this, and you got a ton. These are all the different hit results out of this line trace actually hitting something. So that little, like, so whenever you shoot, oh boy, and I just gave us, okay, they actually need to happen. So this isn't, I didn't even get to play because there's a compile error, because the enemy pawn does not have an object attached to it. But I'm actually gonna just, yeah, okay. I'm not trying to execute it anymore, so that's why it can compile. So the hit results are whatever. See that little, like, red square that's hitting things, that's actually impacting with things? That is the impact point, that is the hit that we are getting the results from. So if we hit an actor, such as this guy, actually we can't. We can't right now. We're gonna do that real quick. So if we go to enemy pawn and click on our guy, you'll notice that and you go down to here, one of the properties of the meshes here specifically is the collision, and it's by default, I guess it's set to collision preset no collision. Change this to, we'll change it to block all. Actually, if you do custom, you'll be able to see all of these. These are all the different things that it can react to. These are all the different things that actors can relate to hitting other actors. So you have your visibility. Visibility is that line trace. That trace that I'm shooting out, that's visibility. Camera, well, it's also for like if you have like pawn senses and stuff, that'll see you too. But more importantly, this also pertains to our line trace. Camera is just to see if our camera clips through them or if our camera bounces off of them. World static, world dynamic, or this is a world static. It does not move. Actually, no, never mind. This is a world dynamic. This is a world dynamic. This is a world static. And I'll let you explain the difference to me. Static, dynamic. Pawn is a character, essentially it's just a blueprint. It's another blueprint that's out in the real world. Physics body is anything with physics. Vehicle, indestructible, are their own kind of things. But more importantly, visibility, remember, line traces. And world static is things that don't move in your world. World dynamic are things that do move. And pawn are actors. But here's another thing. You can set your object type ID here. So this is like default, but if I wanted this guy to essentially identify as a pawn, I'd click pawn. Because this whole thing together is a pawn. But this individually is just an object. So by default, it's world static. But you can tell it to identify as whatever it wants. Unreal Engine is very progressive in that way. So, all of that out of the way. If we hit an actor on hit actor, this will be our reference to the pawn. This is our permission for hitting the pawn. So the hit actor, if the hit actor, so this is the execution pin and the cast failed kind of work like a true false Boolean does, where like if we hit it, we can execute something, and if we didn't hit it, we can execute something else. On cast failed means that it's essentially your output for if you didn't cast to the object. So we're just going to be running with because if nothing happens, nothing happens. We don't give a shit. But we do want to know if we do hit the actor, what we want to do. And we want to die. Oh, no, my bad. We want to Kia. We want to Kia the bad guy. So as enemy pawn, we're going to type out Kia, our custom event, and we're going to execute it. So now, if we play, and we aim, and we shoot, he dies. And you see that little red point? That red point is where we hit him. Not bad, huh? We'll change this. And then this, we'll make this its own separate thing. We're going to call it casting and ampersands custom events. Feeling light blue. Oh yeah. That about does it for my first Unreal Engine 101 class here. So let's recap. what we covered. So right off the bat, we covered variables. Now variables are Boolean, true, false. Integer is a whole number. Float is a decimal point number. You have all your strings, which are just text. And then you have your vector, which is your location. Your rotator vector, which is your 3D rotation. And then you have your scale off somewhere, which I guess he's just fucking off. He just doesn't. I guess a scale would just be a vector. And then you have your transform, which combines all three of those. And we used the float to determine our speed, our character speed, what it should be. And then we used that variable to assign our max walk speed in reference to our character movement. We used booleans to determine if we were aiming or not, and that gives us permission to shoot. Then we combine those two concepts into taking our speed variable, our float variable, and turning it into a boolean output, so we could use that to make this branch boolean decision on whether we should jump high or not. And then we used our location rotation out of transform to calculate our forward-facing vector to shoot a line trace to. And then we covered, at the very end there, we covered casting to other actors. And as a little bonus, we did custom events. So these are the biggest core concepts that I've found in Unreal Engine. Booleans, floats, line traces, transforms, casting, and custom events. That's a pretty good bookmark of things to cover. So in your own research, these are the things to really be looking for. If you want to get into the casting rabbit hole, absolutely go for it. It does not get any more simple. In fact, you'll soon you'll find out that like this is like a complete cop out. Me just using a line trace to do it, because the actual object wildcard system is so much more complex than you would think. Custom events are just the events, but you make them and call them yourselves. Line traces, a point A, point B, but more importantly, it tells you how to think about programming, because with a point A to point B, you wouldn't think that you could get all of these different possible options out of it, but you can. We learned basic objects in like their object properties. It's how we used our target arm length for our camera, or our max walk speed for our character movement. And that's about it. Oh, and we covered the print string. The print string is an excellent feature to have. It just helps you know where to debug at. But yep, that about does it for me. I'm satisfied with that. If you liked it, good. And if not, go fuck yourself.